Today's edition of Back Roads of Illinois. We were bringing you elastic for farming sources and information sponsored by AgriGold. I'm Cesar Delgado. I am your host for today's program. We're glad you're here on a Thursday afternoon. Otherwise, we're running a few things that things will happen in the biofuel industry for right now. We were talking about that with Geoff Cooper on these things in the biofuel. We were welcoming him to the show for today's program. Then we will have a conversation about updating on the Brazilian planting season in Mato Grosso with Cesar Cruz from Advanced Trading on Back Road of Illinois. Otherwise, this is your rural news sponsored by AgriGold in Central Illinois. The world supply and demand report were unchanged for December world supply and demand report. People are not surprising to the report. In Washington, D.C., dietary guidelines are changing on sugar and sodium. These guidelines are changing on the beef dietary guidelines. National Cattle Beef Association are disappointment for the dietary guidelines from FDA and the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. We were talking about next growing season with corn and soybean prices. Input are going to be high for next growing season. We were coming back with Geoff Cooper on Back Roads. We were running a few things that things will happen in the biofuel industry for right now. We were talking about that with Geoff Cooper on these things in the biofuel. We were welcoming him to the show once again. Geoff.
Well, thank you so much for having me this morning, Cesar. Good to see you again.
You too as well. We were running a few. Let's discuss this with the cooking oil or implemented in the U.S. airlines companies for right now. How does this sound? Like a little bit confused about it with cooking oil from China.
Yeah, Cesar, what we're seeing happen in the marketplace is obviously a large expansion in the production of renewable diesel, which is a good thing. We want to see more renewable fuels produced in the U.S. But unfortunately, as a result of these new facilities being built, we're seeing a massive increase in imports of the feedstocks that are being used to produce renewable diesel. I think everyone was hopeful that these facilities would be using more feedstock from the U.S. from U.S. farmers, and they are. They're using more, larger volumes of soybean oil and certainly corn oil from the ethanol industry. But again, we're seeing a dramatic increase in imported feedstocks, and especially the one that is most concerning is used cooking oil from China. We've seen just skyrocketing growth in the amount of used cooking oil that the U.S. is importing from China to be used as renewable diesel feedstock. And it's concerning enough that the product is coming from China, which hasn't exactly been a great trading partner for U.S. agriculture. But adding to that concern is the fact that, we think much of this stuff is not actually used cooking oil. We think it is some of it at least is virgin vegetable oil, including palm oil, that is being mislabeled or misrepresented as used cooking oil in order to get preferential treatment and benefits under U.S. policies. Used cooking oil is treated as a waste feedstock, so it gets a very low carbon intensity value under the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard. It gets an advanced biofuel RIN or a biomass based diesel RIN under the RFS. And so there's value, high value, being assigned to this feedstock, even though there's a lot of suspicion and a lot of anecdotes in the marketplace that this isn't this isn't really all used cooking oil. It is vegetable oil that is being misclassified. So that's one of the big concerns we're seeing. We've seen some both legislative action and regulatory activity, um, hopefully focused on reining this in and getting a handle on this issue before it gets completely out of control.
Why are exporting direct from China for the U.S. airlines companies? Geoff, we have ethanol markets for the country.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We would prefer to see airlines turning to biofuels made from U.S. crops rather than turning to imports from China and Brazil. We're also seeing a lot of imported beef tallow coming from Brazil that is being used as renewable diesel feedstock. And so, as the airlines are thinking about sustainable aviation fuel and really growing into that marketplace, would prefer to see them turning to uh, sustainable aviation fuels made from U.S. based corn ethanol. Rather than Chinese based used cooking oil and tallow coming from Brazil. So, those are some of the discussions that are happening in DC. We think there's going to be a real focus on maybe closing some of these loopholes early in the next Congress, next administration. I think there's going to be a real focus on, um, reducing the level of imports that are coming in, and really doing more to better utilize the domestic resources we have as we build out the sustainable aviation fuel industry.
Geoff, are we going to have a good chunk of cooking oil from China?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, used cooking oil imports from all destinations are surging, but most of that is being driven by China. More than half of the used cooking oil imports that are coming into the U.S. today are coming from China. Um, there's now some used cooking oil coming from Malaysia and Indonesia, which are the two top producers of palm oil. So again, that sort of raises some questions and suspicion for us. But we also get some used cooking oil, legitimate product from Canada and other destinations. So it's just one of those issues that that we really need to get a better handle on, and our friends in the administration and the regulatory side of things, we think could be doing more.
I have a question that what happened to the Brazilian sugarcane export?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're importing a lot of used cooking oil and tallow, and a lot of that tallow is coming from Brazil. In the past, we have also imported a fair amount of sugarcane ethanol from Brazil for the same reasons. It benefits, it is given preferential treatment under U.S. biofuel policies, whether those are state level, like the California LCFS, or at the federal level, like the RFS. Those policies give more benefit to Brazilian sugarcane ethanol, which we think is not appropriate, and we don't think it is justified by the science. But that's the way these policies are structured. Nonetheless, we have not seen much sugarcane ethanol being imported into the U.S. this year, and that's just because of prices. It is not economically competitive with U.S. produced ethanol. It just costs too much to import Brazilian ethanol. It just can't compete with what we're doing here. So we're not seeing a lot of imports. We are seeing the Brazilians sort of shift their focus on exports. They are sending more of their sugarcane ethanol exports to places like Europe and China today, and they are relying less on the U.S. for a market. But again, that's going to be one of those issues that we have to watch closely because some of these new tax credits and developments in sustainable aviation fuel could encourage increased imports of Brazilian ethanol, and that's something we're going to be looking at carefully.
How come the United States accepted from Brazil? Geoff?
Yeah, well, uh, that's the big question. We have historically in this country embraced sort of a free and fair trade approach on biofuels, and there have been times where demand was growing faster than supply in the U.S. and we needed some help from other producers around the world, and Brazil was there and sent us decent volumes of ethanol to help meet our demands. But those days have long since passed. And I'd say, our industry is not at all opposed to free and fair trade, and we welcome free and fair trade. The world's a big place, and there's a lot of countries that need to rely on imports to meet their biofuels demands, but it needs to be fair. And that's where we've had a real concern and a real problem with Brazil is at the same time we are, allowing them to access our market. They put up barriers to us accessing their market. They put a tariff up. They have some other regulations around low carbon fuels that make it very difficult for U.S. ethanol to access that market as well. So that's been the real rub or the real concern with Brazil is we don't have a reciprocal uh, relationship or arrangement, and that's really troubling. Now you look at a country like Canada. We export a lot of ethanol to Canada. We import a lot of products from them, whether that is canola oil or other feedstocks for biodiesel, renewable diesel, um, or many other agricultural products. So in cases where we are being treated fairly, um, trade is a great thing. In cases where these relationships are one-sided, that's a problem for us, and we're going to be talking with the new Congress and new administration about that next year.
Of course, Geoff. Do you have any final thoughts or recap of our conversation about the statistics of the ethanol industry?
Well, Cesar, thanks again for having me. I guess my recap would be, again, it's been a great year for the ethanol industry in 2024. Record production, record outputs or exports, very strong demand. But we do have some looming issues on the horizon that we're going to need to deal with uh, early in the next year, and many of those do revolve around trade and what we're seeing with imports of used cooking oil and tallow and other things. So we've got plenty of work to do, but it's been a great year for the industry, and we're looking forward to even bigger and better things next year.
Thanks, Geoff.
Well, thank you, Cesar. Have a great day and a great holiday season.
This is Geoff Cooper from Renewable Fuel Association on back roads of Illinois. This is your commodity markets on this morning, sponsored by Kyle Bumstead from Allendale Incorporated. Corn futures are down to 5 to 10 cents. Soybean futures are up at 6 to 5 cents. Wheat futures are up at 5 to 10 cents. Let's go with livestock markets. How is the cattle markets and hogs markets for today's opening for this morning? Cattle futures are up at 6 to 5 cents. Feeder cattle are up at 6 to 8 cents. Lean hogs are up at 4 to 6 cents. Crude oil are down to 5 to 10 cents per barrel. Dow Jones is up with 8 points. Let's see, how are the cash markets with cash hog weight from the Department of Agricultural lend-in monies for the Midwest? Iowa hog's weight is 289.1 for per head. Midwest butcher is confidential. Let's go with the Minnesota cash hog prices. Ask price is 81. Now do you want to take a look at the loin markets? Ask price is 80. 64 look for the butt markets. Ask price is 106.84. This is your cash hog markets for today's cash markets on back roads of Illinois. We were going to have a conversation about updating on Brazil planting season in Mato Grosso and Parna. Plus, we have Conviv from Brazil's Agricultural Department. Here's Cesar Cruz from Advanced Trading on back roads of Illinois. Welcome back to the show. What is your favorite holiday season?
Oh, thanks for having me here again. It's always nice talking to you. Well, I'll let you know that I like the winter. I just talked about like being snowy outside is very pretty. I didn't grow up with that. Coming from Brazil, we don't have much snow there, right? I love the winter, and as everybody else, I cheer for White Christmas. But I think my favorite holiday, I don't know. I like Halloween just because my kids have fun, and I like Christmas. Of course, I love Thanksgiving also. Food is amazing during Thanksgiving. This is not a holiday we celebrate in Brazil.
Yeah, getting ready for the winter months.
Yes, that's right. Not much fun, but I like it.
All right. Perhaps let's discuss about updating on the Brazilian planting season in Mato Grosso and Parna. Could you explain to our audience how does farmers in Brazil for right now?
Yep, that's a good question. So it's planting season in Brazil. So we're talking about winter here. Brazil is in the southern hemisphere. It's the opposite weather season there, right? It's about to start summer for Brazilian producers. So they're planting the first corn crop in Brazil, in parts of Brazil, and they also planting their soybean crop. Everywhere they plant the soybean crop in Brazil now. So they're both moving very fast, actually. First corn planting in Brazil is 72% planted, ahead of the 66% from last year. There are a few states that are behind last year. They had problems starting the planting season, but overall, things have been good for Brazilian producers. There has been like 10, 11% of the first corn crop is emerging now, and you're already having 16% filling grains. For beans, also ahead of last year's pace, 94% planted as of last Sunday, versus 90% from last year. And overall conditions are good. 7% already filling pods. And most states in Brazil, they are seeing a good progress with their planting season. They started a little bit late this year in Brazil, but they start moving very fast by mid-October, mid-November, and they caught up with the pace, the average pace in Brazil. In some states, most states they are above the average pace for planting in Brazil right now. And so you asked about CONAB also. The equivalent of the USDA, the WASDE report we have in Brazil from the Ministry of Agriculture, and it was kind of a little boring, I would say. A report this morning came out at 6 a.m. Central Time, 9 a.m. Local time in Brazil. There were no many changes in their estimate. The surprise is that they didn't change much. I would say they changed it a little bit. Their corn estimate, they decreased. Everybody was expecting them to move a little bit higher given the good conditions for the first corn crop, and soybeans are being like planted at a good pace that enable Brazilian producers to plant the second corn crop within a good window. Starting mid-January, February, especially in Central West Mato Grosso. Both estimates for CONAB for corn and beans, they were actually below the trade range. So that's probably the only surprise that we had. So they cut their corn production estimate for next year. Actually, they cut a little bit, very little, from last month. Still ahead of increase from a year ago. And for beans, they slightly increased their estimate from November. They are still behind the USDA for both corn and beans estimate. And if you remember, as we have talked about this in previous conversations, like the main difference that we see from between the USDA and CONAB is on corn production. So right now, CONAB is estimating 19.6 million metric tons for the 24-25 marketing year, and while the USDA is estimating 127. So 120 versus 127. That's a big difference that has been accumulating over the years, and we don't know where it's going to end. We still don't know who's right, and that's actually reflecting also their export estimates. So now CONAB is estimating for the next year 34 million metric tons of export for Brazil for January, February marketing year, while the USDA is estimating 48 million metric tons, but for the March, February market year. So we have 1 month difference for those market years, which is not a big deal, but we have a 14 million metric ton difference in their export estimate.
How is the weather in Mato Grosso for right now?
So it's been good. Mato Grosso, they had rain at the right time, so they could plant their beans in a good window. They actually planted very fast. So between mid-October and mid-November, they planted nearly half of what they expected to plant in Mato Grosso. They continue to have a good rains. So CONAB doesn't have a rating report like we have here in the US to show how much is good and excellent, for example. But just by reading their report, the text that they have on their report, weekly report every Monday, suggests that the crop has been good, very good in Mato Grosso. Talking to people there, everybody's saying they are going to have a good crop. And because this crop was planted within a very short window, beans were planted in a very short window, we can expect, of course, they're going to harvest those beans in a very short window also in late, mid-January, mid-February, within the ideal window for them to plant their second corn crop. The main concern now is with weather in January, February, because if they get some rain there, they're going to be delayed harvesting beans and planting the second corn crop. which for Mato Grosso is a risk of having, the later they plant, the higher is the risk for them to have a drought going forward in the season. So this is something that we have to watch going forward, something for us to keep checking the weather, especially in central Brazil in January.
How is the growers? Do they want to go have you on Brazil agricultural? They should go to have more information.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. Cut the first part. I didn't hear very well. Can you say that again?
Growers. Do they want to go have you on Brazil agricultural? They should go to have more information.
If someone wants to contact me to have more information about Brazilian agriculture, they can contact me on, well, you can find me on our website, advancedtrading.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm also on LinkedIn, Cesar Cruz. You can look for me there. I'll be happy to chat with you.
Do you have any final thoughts or recap of our conversation about updating on Brazil planting season and Brazil's RELA?
Good. I would like to let your audience know that going forward, there is a good indication that both Brazil and Argentina, they're going to have a very good year for both corn and beans. Right now, like, we can say much about the second corn crop in Brazil. The only thing we can say is that the conditions are good for producers to harvest their beans and plant the second corn crop in Brazil, starting January, February, going forward. But most of the second corn crop will be planted within that window, mid-January, late February. But weather can give us surprises. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. So far, things look good for conditions to harvest and plant in January. So that's one message I want to leave with you guys. The second message is that we still need to keep checking how the difference between CONAB and the USDA estimate, especially for corn, not only for production, but also for exports. Brazil domestic demand has been very strong, and that can make Brazil less competitive in exports. But let's see what's going to happen going forward. The market year for corn in Brazil starts in March for the USDA, in February for CONAB. So I'll be happy to come here and give you all updates from Brazil and Argentina.
March feeder cattle $dash 800 closing at $258.575. February live cattle $dash 525 closing at $190.850. February lean hogs $plus 150 closing at $84.475. March corn -4 single quote 6 closing at $4.43 single quote 4. March soybeans +0 single quote 4 closing at $10.03 single quote 2. March Chicago wheat -4 single quote 6 closing at $5.58 single quote 4. March KC wheat -4 single quote 2 closing at $5.63 single quote 0. Closing quotes provided by Kyle R. Bumstead Branch Office Manager Erickson, Nebraska 308-708-7340. Thanks to join us for this afternoon on the show. Just make sure that you can listen on YouTube and whenever you get your podcast. This has been Backroads of Illinois. I am Cesar Delgado. Have a great day.